George Sodder, born Giorgio Sodu on November 23, 1895, in Tula, Sardinia, immigrated to the United States as a teenager. It's unclear why he made this choice, but soon thereafter, Giorgio adopted a more Americanized version of his name and began working for the railroad in Pennsylvania. Eventually, George made his way down to West Virginia and ended up marrying a woman named Jenny Cipriani, a fellow Italian immigrant who was 7 years younger than him. By 1945, the couple had 10 children: John, Joseph, Marion, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty, and Sylvia. The Sodder children ranged in age from 3 to 22, and 9 of them still lived at home. George Sodder owned a successful trucking company called the Dempsey Transfer Company. As a result, the Sodders were doing well financially and lived in a large 2-story home approximately 2 miles north of town. Christmas Eve started off happily enough for the Sodder family. The children were excited and feeling the Christmas spirit, especially when Marion, the oldest daughter, arrived home from work that evening with additional gifts for everyone. George and Jenny went to bed around 10 p.m., taking their youngest child, Sylvia, with them. They gave the other children permission to stay up later to play with their new toys and listen to the radio. Marion stayed up with them. The older boys, John and George Jr., went to bed around 11 p.m., but could not recall later if any of their siblings were still awake at the time. It was typically Marion's job to get her younger sisters to bed, but she didn't do so that night because she fell asleep on the sofa while reading a magazine. At approximately 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny woke up and answered it, but she didn't recognize the voice on the other end of the line. It was a woman who asked for a man whose name Jenny didn't recognize. She heard laughter in the background, and, believing this was just someone who had dialed the wrong number, hung up the phone. Jenny then briefly walked around the house, checking to make sure that everything was okay. She saw that Marion was asleep on the couch, but didn't see any of the other children in the living room. Assuming that everyone else had gone to bed, Jenny did the same. She was awakened once again at 1 a.m. by what sounded like a rock hitting the roof. It was windy that night, so she didn't think too much about the strange noise and soon drifted off to sleep again. Just 30 minutes later, Jenny was woken up once more, this time for a far more ominous reason. The bedroom was filling up with smoke. Panicked, she woke up George, and the two of them ran out of the room. According to Jenny, the back wall of the den located across the hallway from their bedroom was already engulfed in flames. The lights, which had still been on when Jenny was first alerted to the smoke, now went out. George and Jenny ordered their children to leave the house and then ran out the front door. Marion woke up and ran to her parents' bedroom, where she found 3-year-old Sylvia and picked her up. They made it out of the burning home and met their parents outside. At this point, John and George Jr. woke up and realized what was happening. Due to minor discrepancies in the various stories told about the events of that night, it's impossible to recreate exactly what happened. For example, one account states that John and George Jr. attempted to get the attention of the other children on the second floor merely by yelling at them before running down the stairs themselves. They reportedly heard one of their younger brothers call back to them, but there was no communication with the 5 children who didn't make it out. Another account has John shaking the children awake before he and George Jr. made their escape. What does not seem to be a point of contention, however, is that the boys barely made it down the staircase before it was engulfed in flames. Both sustained minor burns. George and his 2 older sons rushed to get a ladder to prop against the side of the house so that the other children could escape. However, the ladder, which was always kept nearby, was mysteriously nowhere to be found. Desperate to save his children, George attempted to back a truck up the house, but inexplicably neither truck on the property would start. They had no previous issues with either vehicle, so he was at a loss to figure out why they suddenly wouldn't start. It has been suggested that George may have unintentionally flooded the engines in his haste to start the trucks. Marion ran to a neighbor's house for help. Mrs. Davis attempted to phone the fire department but was unable to get through to the switchboard operator, and there was no way to directly dial the fire department in 1945. Thomas Smith, another neighbor, had been driving by at around 1 a.m. and saw that the home was on fire. He turned around and drove back into Fayetteville, where he was able to reach the fire chief by phone. Unfortunately, the fire department was short-staffed, possibly due to the holiday, and didn't arrive at the Sodders' home until several hours later, at 8 a.m. Fire Chief F.J. Morris reportedly attributed the slow response to difficulties driving the fire truck, which he himself could not drive. Some reports stated that the home took only 45 minutes to burn down, but authorities later admitted the fire continued to burn for hours. The police searched for debris on Christmas morning, but the thoroughness of that search would become a point of contention. George and Jenny were understandably overcome with grief over their devastating loss. However, at least initially, they appeared to accept that 5 of their children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, had in fact perished in the fire. The state fire marshal's office advised George not to disturb the scene in any way until they'd had a chance to conduct an investigation. They went on to conclude that the children had died in the fire and opted not to investigate further. George decided that he wanted to create a memorial garden on the site, and on December 29th, just days after the fire, Jenny's brother Jimmy used a bulldozer to fill the basement with dirt. A funeral service for the 5 children was held that day at the site, but George and Jenny were too distraught to attend. The coroner's office convened an investigation the following day, ultimately concluding that the fire was likely caused by faulty wiring. This seemed like an unlikely explanation to the Sodders. However, they had just recently had the home rewired and inspected. For the next 2 years, George and Jenny Sodder attempted to get on with their lives. They were still grieving but had accepted the authorities' conclusion that 5 of their children had died. However, this would change in 1947. That year, an article published in Look magazine caught their attention. It contained a photo featuring several children, and both George and Jenny felt that one of the kids bore a striking resemblance to their deceased daughter Betty. They had always been troubled by the fact that no substantial human remains were recovered during the search. Once they saw the photo, the Sodders became convinced that their children did not die in the fire. They hired the first of several private investigators to help them investigate their chilling suspicion. Though it couldn't be proven that the girl in the photo was Betty Sodder, George and Jenny remained certain that their children had been abducted, and that the fire was set to cover up that fact. It was around this time that they learned that Fire Chief Morris had allegedly found a human heart among the debris and buried it in a box on the property. When asked why he hadn't notified them of this before, he stated simply that he thought he'd already told them. Morris went with the couple and pointed out the location of where he had buried the box. They dug it up and, for unknown reasons, George took it directly to the local funeral director. After examining the organ, the director said it was a beef liver, not a human heart. Due to its rancid smell, the organ box was then placed outside on the porch steps, where it soon mysteriously vanished. Some believed that waste disposal might have picked up the box, but this was never confirmed. Allegedly, Morris later admitted that the organ was, in fact, a beef liver. He claimed to have lied about finding a human hearted in the rubble to convince the George and Jenny Sodder that their children died in the fire and give them a sense of closure. Several decades later, it's difficult, if not impossible, to definitively answer if any remains were found during that initial search. Some accounts state that no remains whatsoever were recovered initially. However, there are 2 contemporary accounts that suggest otherwise. According to the State Sentinel on December 26, 1945, tin roofing and other debris was removed and a part of one body was found. On January 2, 1946, the Montgomery Herald had this say on the subject: "No more parts of the bodies were found, other than as reported the day following the fire." That small portion of a spinal column, apparently that of the little girl, 6, was placed in a container, and it in turn placed in the center of the basement, into which the others had fallen. It must be noted that neither newspaper cited any sources for this information. Some, including George and Jenny, argued that the fire did not burn hot enough to fully cremate 5 people, and that more remains would have been discovered if the children had actually died there. After all, fruit jars, bed springs, toys, a stove, and part of a dictionary were found among the debris, so not everything was destroyed by the fire. Jenny Sodder contacted a crematorium employee who informed her that even a fire at 2,000 degrees burning for 2 hours would still leave human bones intact. She conducted her own experiment, attempting to burn animal bones to ash, and was unable to do so. It has also been noted that the Sodder's basement contained coal, which would have made the fire burn even hotter. Several years after the mysterious tragedy, 4 people, Jimmy Cipriani, Carl B. Vickers, F.J. Morris, and Reverend James F. Frama, testified to having found bits of what appeared to be human bone among the debris on December 25, 1945. It's unclear if George and Jenny were told about this at the time, or whether anyone else was informed. George Sodder had the site of his former home excavated in 1949. After a thorough search was conducted, 6 small bones were discovered, 4 of which were human and had come from the same person. These 4 bones, all lumbar vertebrae, showed no signs of fire damage and came from an individual who, according to estimates, died at the age of 16 or 17. Maurice, the oldest of the 5 children, was only 14 at the time of the fire. However, it was later concluded that the bones likely came from the dirt used to fill in the Sodder's basement, and were not related to the family or the fire. George and Jenny offered up a $5,000 reward for information leading to the discovery of their missing children, a reward that they soon doubled. They also used flyers and a billboard to disseminate information and pictures of the children as widely as possible. In 1967, Jenny received a letter postmarked in Central City, Kentucky. Inside there was a photo of a young man and a cryptic message written on the back. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A 901, 32, or 35. Jenny believed that the young man strongly resembled their son Louis, who had been less than a week shy of his 10th birthday at the time of the fire. The Sodders hired another private detective to investigate the photo, but sadly, he took their money and disappeared. George followed up on this and several other leads in person, even traveling to Central City himself, but was unable to find any clues or evidence. George and Jenny Sodder believed in 3 possible scenarios for why their children were abducted. 1. They were victims of human trafficking, which did exist in the United States in the years during and following World War II. No evidence supporting this theory has ever been found, though. 2. They were taken to another location and killed by a former employer or associate as an act of revenge. 3. They were kidnapped by Jenny's brother Frank and taken to Tampa, Florida. This theory was later disproven by one of their private investigators, who went down to Florida to investigate. Regarding the second theory, just days before the fire, the Sodders had been visited by an insurance salesman named Fiorenzo Giannutolo, who had also previously been George's employer. He urged the couple to take out life insurance policies on their children, which they refused. Giannutolo reportedly became angry and threatened that their home would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. Naturally, Giannutolo seemed like a logical suspect if the fire was indeed an act of arson. It was also alleged that Giannutolo's hatred of George Sodder was due to the latter's outspoken dislike of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Another interesting detail, C.G. Giannutolo, Fiorenzo's cousin, reportedly offered to help the Sodders following the fire, even claiming that he intended to erect a small temporary home for them on their property. It's unclear if he actually did this, however. Some have also suggested a possible mafia angle connected to George and Jenny's Italian roots, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence to support this. A local bus driver reported that on the night of December 24, 1945, he witnessed people throwing what appeared to be balls of fire at the Sodder home as he drove his bus past the house. The following spring, Sylvia found a small, hard, dark green rubber ball-like object in a bush nearby. George felt it looked like a pineapple bomb hand grenade. This, coupled with the noise that Jenny had heard that night, led the family to believe that the fire started on the roof and was intentionally set. There were a number of unverified sightings of the children following the fire, in a vehicle, at a restaurant, and at a hotel. The authorities located the woman who called the Sodder home that night, and she confirmed that it was just a wrong number call. Another eerie wrinkle to this case came from a report that the Sodders' phone line had been cut the night of the fire. The police found and arrested a man who was spotted on the Sodders' property around the time of the fire, stealing a block and tackle. This man, Lonnie Johnson, claimed that he had meant to cut the power line but had accidentally cut the phone line instead. It's unknown why he would have wanted to cut either one, though. He was charged with theft, and it doesn't appear that he was suspected of anything more sinister than that. John, who, according to one account, had shaken the children awake that night, was the only member of the family who believed that his siblings really died in the fire. To their dying days, George and Jenny believed that the answers to what had happened to their children were still out there and that they could still be alive. George Sodder died in a hospital in Charleston, West Virginia in 1969. The billboard with the children's pictures on it remained up until Jenny's death in 1989. Following her death, it was taken down and the Sodder family's property was sold. The second home built on the Sodder land still stands today. In 2021, Sylvia, the last remaining member of the Sodder family, who was only 3 years old when her home burned down, passed away. Though the family is gone now, there are many out there who still hope to one day have definitive answers about what happened on that fateful night back in 1945. Thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe for more. See you next time. Bye.